It is 1774. Along the east coast of North America, tensions are mounting between the relationship of Great Britain and its American colonies. But on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, there is a far more volatile conflict brewing. The colony of Virginia wishes to cement its claims within the Ohio River Valley, but is being disputed by the natives of the region. As Virginians begin to move into this land, they become attacked by the Shawnee, who use the land as their hunting grounds. In response, Virginia establishes a garrison at Fort Pitt, renamed after the Virginia governor Lord Dunmore. It is apparent war is going to erupt once more upon the Ohio, and in April a group of vigilantes massacre a group of Mingo near Yellow Creek. The Mingo in question were family of the native orator Logan. Attempts to smooth the Virginian and Ohio Indians' relationships were now futile as multiple war parties raided settlements. By autumn, Dunmore was ready to respond with 2 divisions of Virginia militia numbering a little over 2,000 in full began to make their way northwest toward the Shawnee homelands. Dunmore personally leads the northern division to Fort Dunmore, while the southern division was entrusted to Colonel Andrew Lewis. By early October, Lewis had encamped his force at the confluence of the Kanawha with the Ohio at a place dubbed Point Pleasant. From here, he intends to meet up with Dunmore's column and cut deep into the Shawnee heartland, which he could see just across the river. But little does he know that the battle will be wrought to him. At approximately 6 a.m. on October 10th, Lewis's encampment comprised of 2 wings screened by a line of sentries. The entire force numbers roughly around 1,300. Joseph Huey and James Mooney, along with 2 sergeants, go for an early morning hunting outing, hoping to bring back fresh deer turkey to combat their meager rations. Unbeknownst to them, a small group of Shawnee warriors are scouting out the position of the Virginians. The 2 clusters stumble in upon one another. Legend has it that Trevor Ross, an adopted Shawnee, fires the opening shot that kills Huey. Mooney quickly takes flight to find the nearest militia company and report the natives' whereabouts. The Shawnee party rushes back to the main column of natives led by Cornstalk. Mooney reached the camp of John Stewart, who relayed the situation to Lewis. By 6:30, a third of the army was on the move. A dozen of well-rested men comprised each of the 8 companies in 2 columns made their way north. Colonel William Fleming on the left and Charles Lewis on the right. A little over 500 yards beyond pickets, Fleming's Butworth column made contact. Lewis became stopped by a few hundred yards to the south, but instead of finding a few natives, they had become engaged with the head of over 700 Shawnee and Mingo warriors who were looking to ambush the encampment. Within the first few shots, Mooney is killed. Several of Lewis's scouts are dead on the forest floor. Cornstalk is ambushed and now aims to isolate the 2 columns. Charles Lewis paced behind his troops, trying to keep the undisciplined militiamen in line and ignoring the early casualty accumulation. But he would pay for his boldness, taking no tree for cover and soon being hit and forced to stagger back to the rear. Cohesion soon began to evaporate among the Augusta ranks, as many of the militiamen were being commanded by officers from other companies, and these captains were quickly fallen to the warriors who used every fallen tree, trunk, bush, or rock for cover, carefully picking their targets off one by one. Fleming's column were able to fare a little better, but the colonel was soon forced to leave his men after receiving 3 wounds. Upon returning to the camp, he informs Andrew Lewis of the situation. That left French and Indian War veteran Evan Shelby to assume command. He knew the 2 columns must be united, but needed more men to do so. The Augusta men were losing ground fast. Pickets around the camp could hear the battle drawing near. A band of warriors tried to outflank the Virginians via the bed of Crooked Creek. The Virginia army was teetering on collapse. The rest of the camp was hastily divided into 4 ad hoc units. John Lewis gathered the pickets and those unfit to fight to begin building breastworks for an inner layer defense to fall back upon. A band of Botettward companies, helmed by John Stewart, rushed to the left, while John Field led his men from Culpeper County as well as the rest of the Augusta Battalion to stop the slide of their fellow countrymen. The companies of Nell, Hines, and Moffett rushed up Crooked Creek, aiming to stop the flanking maneuver of the natives. The desperately needed reinforcements arrived on the field by 9 o'clock. The elements of surprise for Cornstalk had been completely lost, but losing this fight would mean an invasion of their homeland just across the Ohio. The battle soon intensified as the Virginians started to regain ground inch by inch. By 10, Shelby achieved his goal of unifying the columns, even if it was just a thin line. The advantage for Cornstalk had been completely dashed. Unable to make a flanking maneuver due to the Ohio River and sheer cliffs, that meant the natives would have to break right through the Virginian line. Warriors rushed into the Virginians, hand-to-hand combat often transpired. The lines were so close that verbal taunts were exchanged between both sides. For 3 hours, the lines were at close quarters, the Virginian line remaining upon a wooden slope above bottomlands. Natives used recently felled trees within the bottomlands to cover for return fire. Many of the Virginians would recall till their dying day the bravery of the natives, and it was probably the same with the natives' view of their adversaries. By 1 o'clock, both sides had grown exhausted. Cornstalk began pulling his forces back to a low ridge a mile north of the battlefield. The retreat was slow as warriors continued to pop up and fire shots to keep the Virginians from pursuing. A band of militiamen did pursue, managing to climb the steep hill and attempted to fire down upon the retreating Shawnee and Mingo. Whatever effect this last action had was probably little. By 3 p.m., rain began to wet the leaves on the ground, and the sounds of fighting had at last diminished at Point Pleasant. The Virginians had suffered several crushing losses in their ranks. At least a third of the Army's officers were among the casualty list. In all, 75 of the militia had been killed, with well over 100 being tended to varying degrees of wounds. As for Cornstalk's warriors, it's uncertain exactly what their figures were. At least 30 bodies were found on the battlefield, with several known to have died from their wounds in the days after. Although taking a beating, Andrew Lewis's small militia army had held their ground and driven the natives off the field of battle. The days after the fight, crude earthworks were dug as the encampment turned into a large hospital to tend to the wounded. There are many shot in 2 places, Colonel Christian would write to his commanding officer. Some and free. They are in a really deplorable situation. Bad doctors, nothing to dress with proper makes it still worse. But the Virginian sufferings would prove to be worthwhile. Their defeat of Cornstalk convinced the rest of Shawnee and Mingo that the fights were to only get bloodier and bloodier. On October 19th, representatives of Chief Logan met with Lord Dunmore in present-day Circleville, Ohio. The resultant agreement would become known as the Treaty of Fort Charlotte, which cemented the Ohio River as the boundary between Virginia and Shawnee lands. The Shawnee further agreed to cease harassing travelers upon the river. During the hearings, an agent of Logan recited his speech on behalf of the chief. The recited speech would become known as Logan's Lament. Go down in history as one of the most famous speeches in Native history. Following a Virginian raid on the Mingo village of Salt Lick Town, Lord Dunmore's war effectively had come to a conclusion. Before disbanding, elements of the Virginia militia gathered at Fort Gower in November, where they were informed of the Continental Congress boycotting English goods in response to the Intolerable Acts. In support of the boycott, the Virginians would sign what would become known as the Fort Gower Resolves, which asserts the militia who had participated in Lord Dunmore's war were willing to defend themselves against the Crown to protect their rights. For the first time in American history, such a declaration was made by colonists. Just 5 months later, the War for American Independence would commence. You know, the Battle of Point Pleasant is a bit of a pickle when it comes to placing it in the importance of American history. Some claim that the Battle of Point Pleasant was the first real battle of the American Revolution, that Lord Dunmore was conspiring to have Andrew Lewis's Virginian army be crushed by the natives and therefore be unable to rebel against the colonies. I don't really buy into this conspiracy, and I don't really like that I'm calling it the first battle of the American Revolution. The importance of Point Pleasant should be viewed in a different light, however. Consider, if the Treaty of Fort Charlotte was not signed, the Shawnee and the Mingo and other tribes on the western frontier would continue raiding settlements. It would continue causing a ruckus. While the American Revolution's going on, now you're going to have a military trying to go between east and west. The American colonies could not fight a two-front war at all during the American Revolution. So, what the Treaty of Fort Charlotte does, it ensures that the western frontier, for a time, and I'm like, we're only talking about 2 to 3 years here, people, for a time is mostly quiet, which allows for the Continental Army to form and focus on fighting the British out east. Inevitably, the American Indians will go to war primarily with the American colonies on behalf of the British, but by then the war had already gone on for 2 to 3 years. The War of Attrition was starting, and by 1783, London is tired of the conflict, and ultimately America will get its independence. I'd like to thank you for watching this edition of Construction Paper Battlefield. If you would like to have more research done on the Lord Dunmore's War, here is the Dunmore War book by Glenn F. Williams. This is a fantastic book that documents the entirety of Lord Dunmer's War, placing its importance in American history. Also, be sure to check out the Osprey Publishing book on the Battle of Point Pleasant. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to head over to our YouTube channel, Read Down Productions. Make sure to subscribe, hit that like button under the video, and also hit the bell to be sure you keep notified with all of our activities. Thank you for watching.